Coming up on the program, we're going to be talking about getting your garden ready for winter, as well as talking cold frames.
We're also going to speak with Doug Oster, and he's a home and garden editor for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, and he's also a radio show host. And we're also going to talk about making your own cleaning products. All that and more coming up today on the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Podcast.
The Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Podcast is permeating into your ears with your host, Joey Bear.
And it could be the weeds. Some gardeners try to get all the weeds out of their garden. Other gardeners leave them in their garden. It's really a decision that you need to make. There's benefits to both sides of that. It's just something that you need to figure out what you want to do for your garden.
And Holly Bear.
Canning is a science. When you're canning, you want to make sure you follow the directions, follow the recipe, don't cut corners, don't replace things. It's crucial to you, your health, and your family.
They're professional gardeners with full-time jobs, and they're on the air now.
Welcome to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Podcast. We are happy that you've joined us. I'm your host, Joey Baird. Beside me is my wife, co-host, best friend, and gardening partner,
Holly Baird.
Behind the TWVG microphone here in the WI Garden Media Studios in southeast Wisconsin. The information that you're going to hear is important and vital to your garden. You just may have to tweak some of the dates and times that you applied for your particular growing zone. If you're tuning in for the very first time, we welcome you and encourage you to check out all previous podcasts, which can be found on our website. Underneath the podcast tab, our website's the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com. It's for the health conscious organic gardener worldwide. So no matter where you're at, the information is good and viable to your garden. Again, you may have to just kind of tweak some of those times that you applied for. We've got 13 previous episodes on that. And 15. This is episode 14 episodes on that. And on the website, underneath the podcast tab, it goes. You can find all our previous guests and topics. There's something for everyone there. If you're tuning in for the very first time, you may not know who we are, or you may have heard of us. We'll tell you a little bit about what we do, and then we'll get all into how to begin to prepare your garden for winter.
So aside from this podcast, we also do a couple weekly video series. We have our main weekly video series, then we have some other ones such as growing in containers and some tips and tricks and quick tips, and keeping it simple type stuff. So yeah, then we also have our quarterly digital magazine. This is available online. It's quarterly and it's free. And it's a full color magazine that we produce.
You can download that, read it online, or print it out for your leisure. So that's a little bit of what we do, and a lot of other things that we do along the way. Well, as we get into fall, we know winter is not far behind. For many of us in the northern portions of the United States, that means the outdoor growing season is pretty much closed and done. For those of you who are in the southern portions of the United States, that means the cool season is upon you, and you can begin planting some of those cool weather crops, such as, let's say, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, leeks, onions. So, that's, well, I don't know if you can plant onions in the south at this time of year or not, can you?
I'm not sure.
But you can plant the cool weather crops, the onions, or the cabbage, the broccoli, cauliflower, items like that. But up here in the northern portions, and maybe you in the southern areas of the United States care not to grow during what we consider the cool or winter portions. So there's some things that we need to look at before we just hang the shovel and the rake up and put the garden trawl away and pack up the seeds until January, because that's when we start preparing for planting again. There's a couple of things that we do in preparation for fall. Now, if you're going to put cold frames in, we're going to cover that in the next segment of the program. But what we've been doing in the last several years and found it to be very efficient and effective is we take leaves and mulch them and use them as a cover for our garden.
Right, so this covers our soil. It does a few things. One is it breaks down so that you have some good compost. And two, it covers the soil, and as the groundwater starts to seep in, it's going to add some good nutrients to your soil. And then it also has a mulching effect if we use it around plants.
Well, the thing is, in nature, there's not very many areas that have bare soil. Mm-hmm. There, you either have prairie grass in the prairies, you have leaves in the woods. About sand in the desert, about the only thing that's really exposed to the natural elements.
Right.
So we want to mimic that, and now farmland, humans have come in and altered that, but we want to cover the soil, and what that does is that holds moisture, nutrients, that keeps microbial life in the soil, that keeps the insects in the soil. Where if you just had bare soil, a lot of these microbial bacteria, the worms, the thing, they wouldn't be as close to the surface as they naturally would be in a natural environment because of the bare soil, the exposure to the atmosphere, the environment, the weather. So what we do is, and you can do this on raised beds, traditional ground, we take and we mulch every leaf on the property, and we even bring some leaves in that we've mulched, and we cover our growing areas. And for example, the area where we have our butternut squash and our spaghetti squash, it's a 80 square foot raised berm bed. It's just a designated area where we grow. And last year we covered it with about a foot of leaves. Came in the spring, never did a thing to it, simply moved the leaves back with a trowel, put a seed in the ground, and walked away. And at this point of the year, there's not a leaf to be found because they've all broke down and went into the soil.
Right.
Now, we're going to attempt to find more leaves, be more efficient with the leaves that we have, the falling leaves of the trees that we have around the property. We even went to the street last year and vacuumed up leaves that were in the street.
In the curb.
In the curb. That that people put there for city pickup. So we did this for about three weeks. Worked on just getting leaves after leaves after leaves and mounding them in the garden. We also areas that had poor growth that year or last year. We created compost piles for abundance amount of leaves and kitchen scraps that we would bring in over the winter months.
Right.
And kind of we had 2 or 3 specific targeted areas where we had compost piles to where we would mound leaves up. And a couple of years ago we did this on a very small scale and realized the benefit that this was presenting to us. Another thing that needs to be done before winter is you add compost, or if you're in...
Talk about... Okay.
You add compost, or if you're in a rural area or you can have access to manure, you want to add that and allow it to break down over the winter months.
What about coffee grounds?
Coffee grounds in an urban setting, we are able to have abundant access to coffee grounds from our local coffee shop. And that all simply relates to, we bring a bucket, we have our name on it, they fill it up within about a day. We come back, pick it up, drop another bucket off, and within a week we can have about 50 to 80 pounds of coffee grounds. So those will also be put on the garden in areas that are requiring more nutrients. They'll be worked into the soil lightly with leaves placed on top of them, and over the winter months, this will all break down. Now, with the leaf piles, basically, no matter how big of a pile you put on the of leaves you put, by the end of winter, it will reduce 50 to 75%, just by breakdown of the leaves and the kind of the compaction of the leaves. So you want to, based on how you do this, you want to be aware that you're not going to pile 6 foot of leaves up in a bed, come back next spring and try to plant it. You're going to have to remove certain amounts of leaves if you're going to plant, lettuce or something in that area. So that's some of the things that, what other things need to be done in preparation for winter? Well, we've got our garlic. Garlic gets planted in the fall. We talked about that in the previous episode, the techniques and tips that one needs to follow in order to have successful garlic growing. What else we have?
We talked about leaves, compost, coffee grounds. I think that's kind of it. I can't really think of much else.
So that is some of the things that need to be done. Now, some people will plant shallots in the fall, so they're ready to go for spring. We choose to just plant them as soon as the soil can be worked in the spring. So that's just some of the things that we're looking at when it comes to putting the garden to bed. And some of you will grow in the greenhouse all winter long, or
if you're in a warmer climate,
right.
You might grow some cool weather stuff.
Right, cool weather crops, as we spoke about a little bit earlier.
But you can always, it's not like you're going to necessarily grow your whole garden like that. You can always break it up.
Right. So, and also get the garden tools in the garage, in the shed, in the house. See what you might need, what maintenance needs to be done. Let's not forget about that, because most of us, or many of us, or at least we, I'll categorize us in this, at the end of the year, we just kind of throw everything in the shed, lock it up, and walk away. We want to make sure we take down our rain barrels and drain our rain barrels out, because...
Oh, yeah. Especially because we have the freezing. It gets cold. We have winter.
You're going to tear your rain barrels up, so you're going to have to drain those out. So the little things that you might just walk past every day and not think about.
And maybe you're one of these people that takes your garden fence down. You could do that. We've decided we've left ours up now. So there's just little things that you might want to think about, whether it be, like Joey said, rain barrels or garden fencing, or just inspecting your tools to see what you might have to look for. And
also, if you know where certain crops are going to be planted next year, you could maneuver trellises around to where they are ready to go in the spring, that you're not wasting valuable time preparing or building or constructing or structuring trellises in specific areas. We have one that runs the width of one of our garden beds that we are going to pull 2 fence posts up and move it to the bed next to it, because we planted beans in this particular area 2 years in a row, and we want to move it just 4 feet to the left of it to another bed and plant beans there. So some of the things that you can do now that you don't have to waste time doing in the spring. Coming up next, tell me what you really think, and we're going to be talking about cold frames if you want to experiment with that during this cool growing winter season.
Oh yeah, what you say? You say Nasala Kombucha. It'll put some glide in your stride and some pep in your step. Nasala Kombucha. Yeah.
Nasala Kombucha makes your body happy. Nasala Kombucha makes your body smile.
Do you want your next raised beds to be easy, functional, and beautiful? The Embrace helps you create the garden you've always wanted. Finally, raised beds that everyone can assemble and enjoy. No tools needed. Just slide any lumber into the Embrace corner, fill with your favorite soil mix, and you're ready to plant. Made from 100% recycled steel right here in the USA. And a portion of every sale helps to build school and community gardens all across the country. Let the Embrace help you create your next raised bed. Grow beautifully with the Embrace. Available at local garden centers and online at artofthegarden.net.
If you could double the life of your raised bed boxes by sealing the wood with a non-toxic wood preservative, would you? Well, now you can with a clear, penetrating product called Internal Wood Stabilizer. It's 100% non-toxic and easy to apply. Seal your bare, untreated wood surfaces, even chicken coops, by spraying Internal Wood Stabilizer. It's invisible, seals the wood from the inside out, and never wears off. Recommended by organic gardening experts. Internal Wood Stabilizer. Check it out at timberprocoatings.com.
Hey, Scott Poirier here with GottaGrowIt.com, and I gotta tell you, I'm like nuts over anything you can grow out of the soil and eat. I'm all about growing food successfully. Currently, you're listening to Joey and Holly Baird on the Wisconsin Vegetable Garden Podcast.
Welcome back to the program. If you want to find out more information about the sponsors you've just heard and our entire sponsor lineup, you can find more information out about them at our website. Under the podcast tab, you can find all of those sponsors, their links there. Check them out because they support us and believe in the same gardening beliefs as we do. Those links will also be provided for you in the show notes. Well, it's that time of the show for... Tell me what you really think. This week on Tell Me What You Really Think, we're going to be open, honest, and candid about...
Know-it-all gardeners.
Now, we take a very high level of professionalism when it comes to podcasts, our weekly video productions, as well as our digital quarterly magazine. We feel if you're taking time out of your day to view our content, we don't want to fill it up with a bunch of mumbo-jumbo, non-important, non-relevant topics. If you tune in to learn about growing corn, we want you to learn about growing corn. We don't want to tell a story 2 or 3 minutes long and then that has nothing relevantly to do with corn. So, in this segment, in Tell Me What You Really Think, we go off the professional record, and we are open and candid about these topics that, in some instances, burn us a little bit.
So you get these people that read every gardening book there is, which is good. It's nice, they're nice guides, but maybe they've never actually ran across a problem, or they know how to link to their local university extension, which university extension does have great information, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be the exact situation. You get these people that you say that cornmeal helps this, and they say, oh, that's not what helps, and da-da-da. Well, sometimes you have to figure out what works for you. It's your own little ecosystem in your yard or your porch or wherever you are, and you may have a different situation than what goes by the book. But you get the people that don't want to think about that, they don't want to hear that, and they just think, okay, this is how it's going to be. And that's quite frustrating.
Now, there is some things that the book or the books say that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. But regardless of whether the book says it works or doesn't work, or let's say the book says it doesn't work, for whatever reason, when you go ahead and try the old farmer's method of growing, fill in the blank, put the product on the soil, it benefits your plants. There's no scientific backing that says that this does work this way. There's a certain point where you have to go, hey, scientist gardener, whomever that may be, this doesn't show in the books that it's supposed to work, but it does. So I'm going to continue to do it because it is effective for me and my garden.
Right. For some people, you might find that soapy water gets rid of aphids, and this might not be stated in any sort of book, but it may be something that's well known. So it's just like you kind of have to take everything you read with a grain of salt. Same thing with everything that somebody tells you. Same thing in the canning world. There's a lot of stuff that you're not really supposed to can, and people do can it. And I think that's dangerous and insane, but, that's up to them. And so you have to... In the canning world, I would go by the book as opposed to flying by the seat of my pants. But when it comes to gardening, there's not exactly always likely that there's going to be two situations exactly the same. And I think that's something to remember, especially if you're a new gardener. Your neighbor might, be having a problem. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have that problem. They might be having success, and that doesn't mean that you're not going to have that success. We garden in 3 different areas. We have 3 different situations, and it's all within less than 20 miles of each other. So, and we have friends that live within the area that can grow cauliflower and broccoli. We can't grow cauliflower and broccoli. So it's always different. You may be able to find a hyper-local source, but even if they're half a mile away from you, it may not be the same situation. So I guess the biggest thing is just be considerate. Realize that, yes, this may work for you. You may have read it in a book. You may have heard it from, I don't know, whoever, some fancy gardener. But at the same time, you don't know if it's going to work for you. So don't be discouraged, and just keep in mind that, yes, I think the know-it-alls are trying to be nice and not necessarily nice, but just be caring, but they can also be discouraging as well. So when it comes to gardening, I think it's good to keep an open mind, and what works for you, works for you. Just keep that in mind, It may not work for anybody else at all, but if it works for you, then go on.
Right. Gather the information from a number of sources. Weigh that information out. Maybe try each one of those particular tips. If you have 5 or 6 of the same type of plants that are experiencing the same type of issue, try each one of those methods on a different plant and figure out what works best for you, whether the scientist or the book or the TV host says that it should or should not work. So are you satisfied with that?
Yeah.
All right, we'll close the door on this topic. So let's talk cold frames. Cold frames are a way to extend your growing season, whether early in the spring or later in the fall. Now, when somebody asks us a question in regards to cold frames, we've tried this once, 1 year we tried this, but we always refer to Nikki Jabor's book, The Year-Round Vegetable Gardener. She is a gardener, radio host in Nova Scotia, Canada. She grows in Nova Scotia, Canada, okay? A very cold area. She gardens year-round. She has mastered the techniques on how to successfully grow 4 seasons a year, 365 days a year, and have produce coming out of her garden. The book is The Year-Round Vegetable Gardener. I'm sure it's on all Amazon and all the bookstores. You might even be able to rent it. You can buy the digital thing online for your Kindle or whatever that electronic book thing is.
Kindle.
You can find that online.
E-reader.
Yeah. That may be the way to go. And we're not telling you to go buy this book. We get $0 or kickback for if you do purchase the book. We are simply telling you about the book because it is a phenomenal resource when it comes to year-round growing in extremely cold climates. Some of the techniques that is needed for cold frame growing, well, there's a couple of different ways to cold frame. Let's talk about that first.
So you can build a cold frame
Just out of lumber. You can make it slanted with a clear top on it to where it will gather more sun. You want to face it towards the area where the sun is most prevalent throughout the day. You can actually bury it to where it's subground with a top that still opens up, and that kind of insulates it somewhat.
Yeah.
You can make one out of straw bales.
Yeah, we tried that.
We tried that. Now, with any of these cold frame techniques, the key to all of this is to make it as airtight as possible. So when it's -1 degree outside, it's not -1 degree in the cold frame, because then it's really irrelevant on the construction and what you're growing, because it's dead anyway, because it's -1. You want it to be able to gather the heat and make it warmer internally than it is externally. Now, some people will put water jugs in there that are painted black to absorb the heat. Some people will even go to the lengths of putting a 5-gallon bucket with an aquatic heater in it to keep the internal temperatures warmer than what it is outside. Now, you can go to any length and expense that you want to go to when growing in a cold frame. Some of the things you want to keep in mind is, if you're going to construct a cold frame, regardless of the materials that you're using, construct it, make it as airtight as possible, but also get your plants established before it turns freezing tomorrow night. You want to get these plants to you just don't want to plant the seeds when it's frozen outside and expect them to grow. You want to get a little early jump on it. Give them a chance. As the days become cooler, you want to plant these seeds or starts in the cold frame so they can be adapted. Now, let's make it perfectly clear. In these cold frames, you're not growing cucumbers or pumpkins or watermelon or tomatoes or peppers. You're growing cool weather crops.
So that's like small root vegetables, broccoli, kale,
lettuce, spinach. The cool weather crops that you normally grow early in the spring, you are going to be growing in any type of greens in these cold frames. So that's some of the things that you want to keep in mind when it comes to constructing a cold frame. And there's only a billion and a half different videos online on constructing cold frames and the techniques and the materials. You can do this very, very cheaply, constructing a cold frame, or you can spend a lot of money on it. That's your prerogative on which way you want to go with it. But again, you can find a lot of information online in growing these cool weather crops in cold frames over the winter months. And Nikki is one of those individuals who has this mastered, and we're not going to get too much more in depth to it because we are not going to give you information that we're not absolutely certain on, because we've had some successes and some failures in this particular area as well. Coming up after the break, it's going to be our guest Doug Oster from the Pittsburgh Gazette, and we're going to talk to him about fall gardening. All that and more coming up right after this.
It's all about the soil at ManureT.com. With their grass-fed, antibiotic, and growth hormone-free cattle and horses, owner Annie Haven puts the quality in her premium soil conditioner. 100% organic and natural, whether feeding your flowers or veggies, indoors or out, you can grow organically with confidence. To purchase authentic Haven brand Manure Tea, small orders or large, go to ManureT.com. Always free shipping.
At DollarSeed.com, all of our seeds are only $1 a pack. And we have online resources that teach you all about the rewarding hobby of growing your own plants, flowers, herbs, and vegetables. Imagine the joy you'll feel when your children actually help you harvest your first garden crop, or the pride of knowing you'll never need a florist again. Visit DollarSeed.com and grow a little magic of your own for just $1. DollarSeed.com. What could be healthier?
Hi, this is Nikki Jabor, author of The Year-Round Vegetable Gardener and Groundbreaking Food Gardens, which you can find at NikkiJabor.com. And you're listening to Joey and Holly Baird on the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener podcast.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. For those of you who want to learn more about the sponsors you've just heard and their entire sponsor lineup, we encourage you to do that. Jump on over to the website, thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com. Check them out. They support us because they support us in the same gardening beliefs that we all should be able to garden freely and without any issues. Well, let's go up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to visit with our next guest. Doug is an Emmy award-winning producer. He is also the garden writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can find a lot of his information on his website. We'll give that out in a moment. He is also the co-host of the Organic Gardening radio show that can be heard every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time with his co-host Jessica Walliser. She's a horticultural and author and a bug lover, so that's always good to have. And Doug is an author of a great book. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more about cold winter growing. Welcome to the program, Doug Oster.
How we doing? Thanks so much for having me on. Our motto is for that radio show at 7 a.m. on Sundays, if we have to get up, you have to get up too.
Well, Doug, you've got an elaborate portfolio of information that you've done throughout your gardening career. How did you get into gardening? Where was this a young time in your life, or did you find it later on in life when you were an adult?
It was when I was just a kid. I was actually hanging upside down on a maple tree in my grandmother's front yard, and there she was in this, what she called a ravine between the two houses, kind of a no man's land. And she was out there in her house coat and watering tomatoes, and I wondered what could she be doing? And I went over, and I just fell in love with it then. I convinced my mother to let me put in a vegetable garden in our backyard, and that's where it all began. When I got my first house when I was, 23 years old, I started there. And it just became my obsession and my love, and I just took it from there. And as I worked at different newspapers around the country, I kept writing more and more about gardening, and it just became my way to make a living, I guess.
Now, you weren't always an organic gardener. You are now. You had an aha moment many years ago whenever you were fighting cabbage worms in your garden using a non-organic chemical powder. I believe your young son was in the garden with you and you thought, this doesn't seem right, using this chemical when my children play in the yard? Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that was my epiphany. I just started gardening at that house in my 20s, and I was gardening like my grandparents, and my parents had gardened, and I didn't know any better, and I had cabbage worms really bad, called a friend and said, what do I do about cabbage worms? And he said, get this stuff called 7 and just sprinkle it all over, and you'll be done with the cabbage worms. And I was like, great. And that's what I did. I sprinkled it all over the cabbage plants and thought, wow, I've stopped this invading force from destroying my garden. I looked behind me, and there was my little son as a toddler walking barefoot through the center path of the vegetable garden looking for snow peas. And it hit me right in the face. I was like, wait a minute, I don't think I want my kid walking through this stuff. I didn't know what 7 was. I didn't want to know what 7 was. And when I read what it was, that it's a nerve toxin, I was like, I'm not exposing my kids to this ever again. And I decided I was going to garden a different way. And the most interesting thing about this was in those days, there was no internet. I went to the library, I read everything I could about organic gardening, and what I discovered was everybody was an organic gardener before World War II because there were no chemical pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers. And I thought, wow, those guys those people had great gardens. I can do it that way too. And from that moment on, I have never used chemicals in the garden. And I always say the proof's in the pudding. You can look at my garden blog called Gardening with Doug. Every day I post something, and I show my successes and failures as an organic gardener. You don't have to have chemicals to have a great garden.
And that's fascinating. World War II was about 70 years ago, and prior to that, from the beginning of mankind, they had been able to grow successfully and survive for thousands of years without chemicals, and all of a sudden, the last 70 years, we've thought, hey, we need chemicals to survive.
Is that people are realizing, especially this young generation, first-time, second-time homeowners, I don't have to convince them not to use chemicals in the garden. They just want to know automatically, hey, how do I do this without chemicals because I want nothing to do with it. When I first started talking about organic gardening, I had to do a lot of campaigning. People they thought I was crazy. How could you garden? How could you grow roses or fruit trees or anything without chemicals we've relied on? But as the years have gone on, there's less and less resistance. A lot of the people that I talk to are retired, and they have the same kind of aha moment or epiphany with kids or grandkids, and they see how easy it is to grow without having to use chemicals.
That's great. Now, you're a big advocate of extending your growing season with cold frames. What are keys to a successful cold frame?
Well, I extend the season actually with lots of different things, but my cold frame is my most successful way to grow things. Today, here in Pittsburgh, it's getting pretty cold, but I'm going to be able to be picking all the way through October, November, December. And a cold frame is basically just a greenhouse without heat, a small one put out in the garden. And I've made a couple videos on how I build them. It's real easy. And so it's tilted at 35 degrees about, facing south, so it catches as much sun as possible. It's just got a clear top that has a hinge, and we open it up. We fill it with compost, and we fill it up with plants. And this is a great time to be planting things that love cold weather, things like lettuce and kale, tatsoi, all sorts of different types of greens, radishes, carrots. This is all stuff I could put in my cold frame that will sprout now, or I get the plants and I'll put them in there. And there's nothing better than picking something in January, and then you can brag to all your garden friends and say, hey, I'm picking something, and they say something like, I hate you.
Yeah, you spoke about your video series. Now that can be found. It's called Digging with Doug. It's something I look forward to each week on the Pittsburgh Gazette, Post-Gazette website. We're going to have that link in the show notes for our listeners to go over there and view that. Now, you spoke about building cold frames. For those of us or our listeners who've never built cold frames before, are there materials that you shouldn't use to make a cold frame?
Well, you certainly should not ever use any treated wood in the garden. And so we look for something that's rot resistant naturally, and I use cedar. I can find, and most people could find at a lumber yard, rough cut cedar, pretty inexpensive. It'll last for decades without being treated. And that's what I use. And the other thing about building a cold frame, I'm the least handy person in the world. I don't know which side of a hammer to hold, but yet I was able to put together this cold frame and make it successful. And every year I like to add another one, to tell you the truth, because when you get to the midwinter, you want something fresh from the garden. My kids expect something fresh from the garden when they come back to visit home in the winter. And I love being able to go out there and harvest and make something just that's organic and fresh. And there's just nothing better for you, nothing more nutritious, and nothing that tastes better than something out of the garden. We all know that as gardeners.
Right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Cold frames are good in most climates. We have listeners from all over the world. Are there certain places where it's just far, far too cold for a cold frame to be successful through the whole duration of the winter?
I don't think so, because actually I've been really inspired by another garden writer, Nikki Jabor, who's in Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. And she gardens all year round, and she has a book called Year-Round Vegetable Gardener, and we're kindred spirits. When she talked to me for the first time, we started this is scary, a 15-minute talk on arugula about how it can survive even under those cold conditions. Depending on your winter, you're going to have sometimes great success. Sometimes you're going to lose 50%, maybe even 70%. But on most of the winters here in Zone 5, I'm going all winter long with 75% survival rate, especially with snow cover. Snow cover makes a big difference. The worst thing that can happen for me is I don't have snow cover, and then we go to 10 degrees for 2 weeks. That's when things get tough. But with 4 or 5 inches of snow cover, which is a great insulator, those plants will just sit there, even in zone 3, 4, if you pick the right plants. And they're not going to thrive during the winter, but if they survive, as soon as the warm weather hits, they just take off. And then you get the other advantage of picking again early in the spring when you might not be able to get in to plant because the soil is too wet. You've already had those plants in there. And again, same thing happens. In April, you'll be making these big salads, telling your garden friends, I'm harvesting, and they say, I hate you.
Now, for our listeners who may not are unable to build a cold frame, or are unable to build a cold frame, what plants would you recommend for them to plant to continue having edibles in their garden, or an alternative to cold frames?
Well, you're going to choose the same plants. You're going to choose one that I love is called tatsoi, and the seeds are easy to find. It's from the broccoli and kale family. Only the thing I always say about kale, it's really good for you, but the only way you can eat it is with bacon. And kale lovers hate it when I say that. But the tatsoi is so mild, it just makes this kind of deep green rosette that when my kids were growing up, I could just cut it, throw it in the salad, and no one knew the difference. Tatsoi loves cold weather, but tatsoi, other greens, spinach, lettuces, arugulas. And if you can't do the cold frame, there's a really simple way to protect those plants and kind of make your own little greenhouse out of something called a floating row cover. It's a spun-bound, translucent fabric that acts as a greenhouse, and it's so lightweight that the plants themselves can hold it up. How I use it in the winter, though, is I just go down to the hardware store, get some 12-gauge wire, which they have there, and cut it to size for you, and just make little hoops real low to the ground so that we can preserve as much of that heat from the ground as we can get. And then I just put the floating row cover, or sometimes I'll double row cover something, and that is almost as successful as a cold frame and inexpensive. We use that floating row cover over and over again year after year. And again, you can have all your garden friends hating you, and that's a good thing.
Now, as we get into the fall here, leaves are falling on the ground, And as gardeners, we always should be at least conscious of water retention and holding the moisture in the soil. What are some of the keys that you utilize your leaves for in your garden to hold that moisture in, and some of the other tricks that you may be able to share with our listeners?
Well, this is actually the worst time of the year for me because I live in an oak forest. And so even though the leaves are a great resource, I've got way more than I can use. But basically, my house is built in 1939. The one way I use them is the leaves since then have been thrown over one side into the woods. I can dig down there, and I have the most beautiful black compost. They're actually called leaf mold, but don't worry about that name. Leaf mold is just leaves turned into compost, and that's one way I use it. I'll use shredded leaves also as a mulch, and I also use shredded leaves as an additive to compost. I compost almost everything coming out of the kitchen, and I mix that. Every time I throw in that stuff from the kitchen, I throw in some leaves too. Mulching is a big part of how I succeed in the garden because water is our most precious resource, and most plants enjoy being mulched because it keeps the soil evenly moist. And we don't want the soil drying out, getting real wet, So everything I grow in the vegetable garden, I'm mulching with straw, sometimes shredded leaves. And then in the ornamental garden, I'm basically using bark mulch. But leaves are an amazing resource. When you want to turn them into compost, the quickest way to do it is to shred them. And that could be throwing them in a trash can and running the weed whacker through it, or just running the lawnmower over them. The smaller they are when they start, the faster they'll become compost.
We love leaves here at the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener. Let's talk flowers for just a moment. As gardeners, sometimes in the spring we see sales on bulbs and we decide to get them, perennials, bulbs, and we plant them somewhere and we're not really happy where we planted them because we have planted them behind taller plants. Now is now the time, Doug, to dig them up and move them to a better location, or when should we be doing that?
I used to do it that way. Especially with daffodils, they would get crowded and I would want to move them because they needed some more space and some better soil. I always would mark them in the spring with stakes and then go in there and dig them out. But what I found in the last 5 years from talking to bulb experts is it's better to move these as soon as they're done blooming. So we wait till the spring, and when they're just kind of that foliage is starting to turn brown, that's the time to move them. They're not going to like being moved then, but you'll get more of the bulbs. What we were doing in the fall, which is a great time to move stuff, but you start cutting the bulbs up because you really don't know where they're at. So when you're shoveling, you're cutting them in half. A lot of times, my kids would take the stakes out in the summer. I couldn't find them again. Even though I have a garden journal where everything I plant, I kind of write on there, but, you can't find them exactly. When they're what we call in the green at the end of the flowering cycle, they're easier to find. That's the only reason that I do it that way.
Great. So you have a book out. Could you tell us more about your book, what it's called, and where people can find it?
Well, I got lots of books out, so do I get to name them all?
The Steel City Garden.
Yeah, the Steel City Garden is all about growing plants that are black and gold. Here in Pittsburgh, black and gold's a big deal. That's the Steelers, Pirates, and Penguins is our hockey team. So people go nuts over black and gold. But that book is really an excuse for me to put in my favorite plants that happen to be that color. And I have to tell you about my favorite perennial that's in there. It doesn't have a common name, so you're going to have to look it up. It's called Corydalis lutea. And here's a perennial that will start blooming in April in Zone 5 and go all the way through November. Little yellow flowers, 18 inches tall, gray-green foliage. The deer don't eat it. It grows in dry shade or in full sun. This thing is indestructible. It will make a nice colony after a couple years, and it doesn't do it by underground root divisions. It's just throwing seeds. And so it's not invasive. If you didn't like it, you could just kind of pull it out and give it to some friends. But I love it because it'll throw seeds into containers. And so the next spring, when whatever containers were left out there that I couldn't get in for the winter, all of a sudden they start to sprout up a Corydalis. And I'm like, oh, this is great, because I can just put in a red impatient or geranium or something like that, and the yellow will go good with it. I don't have to replant it. So that's one of the plants that's in the Steel City garden. It just happens to be yellow, but it's my favorite.
And keyword, deer don't like it.
Yeah, believe me, I live in Deer Central here. The deer have no fear of where I'm at. Here, just 7 miles north of downtown Pittsburgh, they run free through here. I've got 2 dogs that chase them, but they're all over the garden, so I have to use lots of different techniques to keep my garden safe.
Well, Doug, the best website for our listeners to come and find more information about you is which one?
I think the best way to find everything I'm doing is just Google Gardening with Doug. That comes off my Pittsburgh Post-Gazette website, and everything I'm doing is there. The videos, the daily garden blog, and the stories, too.
Wonderful information, tons of information. Doug, we greatly appreciate you taking time to visit us with us on the program and share that knowledge with our listeners, and we thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
And we'll be right back after this.
A gardener knows that the key to a good plant is its roots. With poor roots, the end result is not good. Conventional pots and trays cause roots to wrap around and become root-bound. Then you try to unwrap the roots at the time of planting, hoping not to break them. But never again with the Root Maker, a non-chemical innovation that naturally air prunes roots to create more vigorous roots. Never a root-bound plant again. Whether trees, flowers, or edibles, home gardener or commercial grower, more roots means healthier, more productive plants. To get your own, visit rootmaker.com.
It's Joey
and Holly Baird
of the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Podcast, taking a moment to remind you that you can sign up for a weekly email so you don't miss anything that we do, our podcast, our videos, our digital quarterly magazine. You won't miss anything by signing up.
You just go onto our website on the right-hand side. There's a big button for you to press. Just go ahead and sign up for our emails.
And you can also ask us questions. Underneath that big green button, there's a big red button. So sign up for our emails for free. No spam, and if you've got a question, you can send us that as well. WisconsinVegetableGardener.com for the health-conscious organic gardener worldwide.
Hey, this is Craig.
And this is Larry.
From the Urban Farm and Garden Show. And when I'm not in the barn shoveling,
And I'm not out in the garden digging up carrots.
we're listening to Joey and Holly Baird from the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener.
Welcome back to the program. Feel free to check out our sponsors and support them as they support us. You can find more information on them under the podcast tab on our website at thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.
Don't click off yet. Don't close the program out yet. We got 2 more important topics to cover before we get out of here. We got gardening in 2 minutes, and we're going to talk about homemade cleaners. Yep. Holly's going to take that one on. Gardening in 2 Minutes is an audio production that Holly and I produce on a weekly basis for a number of podcasts and a few radio programs. If you would like Gardening in 2 Minutes on your particular program, contact us through the website. This Gardening in 2 Minutes is brought to you by OurDailySalt.com. Chef Felicia Wiles handcrafts kitchen accessories and tools. She knows what the professional chef and the home cook needs. Find more information out on their newly designed website at OurDailySalt.com. Shipping United States and international. This Gardening in 2 Minutes is all about
straw bale gardening. We have covered this topic before, but it's great information, especially if you're planning for next season.
Here is Gardening in 2 Minutes. This is Gardening in 2 Minutes. As gardeners, we have a vast variety of mediums that we can grow plants in. We are taking the practice of growing them in a straw bale. Straw bale is the byproduct of the wheat industry. It's the stalks. There's also a variety of other types of straw, sugarcane straw, oat straw, to grow in.
Straw bale gardening is ideal if you don't have a situation where you may not want to tear the ground up or build a raised bed, or if you have like a condo or a patio.
Straw bales can be purchased for very little money at your local garden center. You can ask on social media, or you may know a farmer that's willing to give you a good deal. This can be one straw bale, or dozens, or in some cases hundreds, based on the achievement that you want to occur into your garden. You can go to your favorite search engine, type in straw bale gardening, and you can see the many different images and videos of people who have successful straw bale gardening. There is a practice that you have to perform before just throwing some seeds or starch into a straw bale. It's called conditioning.
The good news is that it doesn't take much work to condition it. It just takes a couple weeks. And also, you can grow just anything that you can grow in the ground, a container or a raised bed, you can grow in the straw bale garden. You're not limited to just a few plants. You may have to let things vine off of it or build a trellis, but you can grow everything in that straw bale.
And if, depending on what you're growing in that straw bale, in some cases those straw bales can be used again the following year. So you can get 2 years out of one straw bale. For more information on straw bale gardening and to follow our straw bale gardening, you can find all that information at
the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com.
For our weekly video productions, our free downloadable digital quarterly magazine, it's for the health-conscious organic gardener worldwide. For Gardening in 2 Minutes, I'm Joey Baird.
And I'm Holly Baird.
All right, we got one more topic to cover, and we thought that this would be a good topic as we're getting close to our final program of the year. That will be the next program we produce in a few weeks. For episode 16 of the podcast. But we thought as the winter months draw near, as gardeners, we're in the business or in the activity or the hobby of saving money by growing what we eat or growing some of what we eat. One, because it's money saving, and the other reason being it's healthier. So the same two principles in that gardening, it can be related into household cleaners. Holly, talk a little bit about the unhealthiness of some of these store-bought cleaners and some of the ways that we can create our own for pennies on the dollar, as well as improving the health and quality of those who are around us when we use them.
Sure. So one thing about regular cleaners is they use a lot of chemicals, and as most of us have learned and should know, that the chemicals are bad. They can be bad for us. They have carcinogens, and carcinogens do lead to things like cancer and other diseases. So that's not good. Sometimes it even causes reproductive issues, and they can be harmful for children and pets. So that's one thing you want to think about is the chemicals. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't use something like bleach when your family gets sick. I think that is something that is probably necessary to clean with when there's a lot of germs in your home. But when it comes to everyday cleaning, there's a lot of different options. There's things like vinegar, lemon juice, baking soda. All of those make good cleaners. And even stuff like the classic blue dish soap that you see everywhere that you've probably used. And even stuff like even more milder dish soap. But definitely the classic blue dish soap mixed with some vinegar can make some really good cleaning products. So it's just something to think about. Think about where your products are coming from. There's different recipes. Another thing I found is that you can make a lot of stuff and it's cost efficient. So, say the gardening is winding down. You're like, okay, well, I'm gonna, do some home projects. Maybe do a little bit of research about cleaning products that you can make yourself. There's a lot of great websites and blogs. There's even YouTube videos if you don't want to read. There's YouTube videos about how to make your own cleaning products. And something as simple, I make a floor cleaner with a gallon of water. I think it's about a half a cup of vinegar and some baking soda, and it makes a beautiful floor cleaner. If you don't like the smell of vinegar is too much, you can always use essential oils to make it smell better, and those are good aromatics. And then we make our own laundry soap. And I can link the video we have for that as well. And that's pretty simple, and it lasts a really long time. And it's so cheap, especially if a lot of people have high efficient washers now. So that's an option for you as well.
Now this is a powder. This is a dry
It's a
formula.
powder, but you can use this in any water, cold, hot, warm, whatever. And actually, for a long time, I thought powder detergent was bad. But realistically, when you're paying for liquid detergent, you're paying for water in your detergent is what you're paying for. You put a cup of detergent in your washing machine as opposed to like a third of a cup of powder detergent. You're basically paying for water. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And like I said, I know it's good for high efficient washers as well as regular ones, the one that I use. And if you want something more liquidy, maybe you don't like powder, there's lots of homemade DIY ones too, where you do cook cook the ingredients per se, and then you use a liquid. It doesn't. You don't add any water to it. It's still concentrated, but at least it's not powder if you don't like it. But and these are ingredients you can find anywhere, any big box store, your grocery store, anywhere. So it's something to also consider as well. I know Joey just mentioned to me ours is getting low, and I thought, okay, well that's okay. You know, I just got to go get the ingredients, and then I'm set for at least between 6 months and a year, and I can just skip past the laundry aisle when I go see it, as opposed to buying, you know, detergent every 3 months or whatever. And my sister, she has 2 little kids. Her and her husband, 2 little kids. Theirs last them about 6 months exactly. So, and she uses cloth diapers. I don't know if she uses on the cloth diapers, but yeah. So if you think about that, if you have a family of 4, typically as long as you're not super soiled, you can definitely use it for about 6 months.
Now, you do use a pre-treatment on some of this before it goes in a washing machine.
Yes.
That you have created yourself as well.
Yeah, so that is just vinegar and the blue dish soap, and it's just it's equal parts. I just shake it up, and I shake it up every time I use it too. It does kind of separate a little bit. And then I just pre-treat with that as well. And then
it has the same effectiveness as those expensive pre-treatment spray bottles.
Right. And then if you want, you can always scrub it in a little bit if you're not sure about it. Also, if you got body odor, you know, during the summer, we all sweat a lot. If you feel like your clothes are, I don't wear some of these clothes. I only wear them during the summer, and they get kind of dingy, musty smelling. If you spray this like on the underarm area or whatever, it helps neutralize that odor as well. Sometimes you wash stuff and you're like, this still kind of stinks. I'm not gonna lie, I sweat a lot. So, so it's something to think about as well. And it's a good pre-treater for that as well. And another thing is if you use vinegar to, what's it called, as a fabric softener, that's a natural fabric softener. It's also going to freshen your clothes. Your clothes won't smell like vinegar because it'll get rinsed out, but that's something you can add. I think it's like a cup, about a half a cup to a cup that you add to your rinse cycle. So most of these washing machines have an option for fabric softener. You can just go ahead and put some vinegar in there, and then you'll freshen your clothes too.
Well, how much are we looking at? Let's just look at our specific money saving here. How much are we saving a year by creating or making our own fabric softener versus if we
don't use fabric softener.
Or not fabric softener, washing machine, the powder.
It's like 30 cents a load we're saving.
We're saving 30 cents a load, and we do 2 loads every week. So 52, you times that by 100, it's 104 loads a year at 30 cents. Holly's going to pull out the magical machine. And
Did I say about 30 cents?
30 cents times 104. That's going to give you
$31.
About $31 a year that we're saving, that we're not paying basically a chemical company to manufacture products that we can get a much more earth-friendly ingredients to create our own laundry detergent powder.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, and then if you think about how much a bottle of vinegar costs, a big-ass bottle is like maybe $2 at most, depending on where you are. So if you think about that, then that's fabric softener that you can use, and you can use it for other things around the house.
Well, we only do laundry twice a week. There's some people once a week, 2 loads.
Yeah.
There's some people that do laundry virtually every day.
Right.
So you figure 30 cents a day, that's $2.10 a week times 52 weeks. You can considerably save a lot of money.
And it's pretty basic. It's borax, washing soda, baking soda, and then it's called Fels Naphtha. And you can use any, some people use like Dr. Bronner's bar soap, but we use the Fels Naphtha, the bar soap, and you just grate that up. And basically it's like, it costs as much as a big bottle of detergent to make, which may only last you a month or a couple months, as opposed to where you have the powder. And also, if you go to a laundromat, I remember when I used to go to a laundromat, I would want to leave my detergent in my car, and in the winter, sometimes it froze if I forgot it in there. If you have powder, you don't have to worry about it freezing. It's going to be fine. So that's another thing. Or maybe you don't want to carry your big batch of powder. You can find like a little container, like a little, sealable container or just a bag and put your powder in there, and then you don't have to carry your big thing of powder. So that's another idea.
So that's just we will link that video on how we make our laundry powder in the show notes below. Well, that'll wrap it up for this episode. We greatly appreciate you tuning in and joining us, downloading the program, sharing it with your friends and gardening fellow gardeners. We encourage you to check out our previous podcast if you have not done so. We have some wonderful guests, as we have on this program with Doug. We always strive to find interesting and informative guests for each of our broadcasts. So the music you've heard on the program is courtesy of freesfx.co.uk and audioneutronics.com, two royalty-free and copyright-free websites that we use the music on to help liven up the podcast.
And then Nasala, Kombucha, and Dollar Seed provide their own audio.
So until next time for our final broadcast of the 2015 gardening season, I'm Joey Baird.
I'm Holly Baird.
And we will see you in the garden. The Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Podcast is a production of the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com for the health-conscious organic gardener worldwide, and distributed in association with WI Garden Media.